Millard Fillmore was the 13th President of the United States for 2 years and 9 months. He was never elected as President actually, but came to the office as Vice President to Zachary Taylor. He served as President from July 1850 to March 53. His presidency ended as a result of losing the nomination at the Whig Party in June 52. Here we take a brief look at his background. Millard Fillmore was born the 7th of January 1800 in Summerhill in upstate New York. He came from a poor family background, farming and that type of thing they were involved in, but he worked hard as a student and became a lawyer. He became politically involved as well with the Whig Party and won a seat in the House of Representatives in 1837. 4 years later, in 41, he had become chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and in June 48 he was selected to be the running mate of Zachary Taylor for the presidency. Throughout 49 and 50, the issue of slavery created enormous debate within Congress. Congressmen were basically broadly split north and south on how the additional territory, what's known as the Mexican territory, would be developed, which they won in the war in 47 and 48, whether this territory would be slave or free. California moved fast. They went ahead at the ratifying convention and decided in favour of joining the Union and in joining it as a free state as well. Congress followed suit, but this outraged opinion in the South as it broke an implied principle in the Missouri Compromise that slavery should be allowed south of the 3630 line. Henry Clay, congressman, brought forward a series of bills designed to defuse the situation and maintain peace within the Union between North and South. The President, Zachary Taylor, was not really supportive of Clay's plans. However, he died in July 1850 and he was replaced by Millard Fillmore, who was supportive of Clay's approach. By September 1850, California had joined the Union as a free state to the outrage of Southern congressmen. This just happened a couple of months after Zachary Taylor's death. At this stage, Henry Clay was exhausted with all the amendments and arguing for his bills in Congress. As a result, he handed his workload over to a new senator, a young man called Stephen Douglas. Both Fillmore, the new president, and Douglas worked hard to process this legislation through Congress. This became known as the Compromise of 1850. Clay, for his part, was exhausted as an elder statesman and returned to his home state of Kentucky to recuperate. Fillmore became president in July 1850. One of the first things he done was he dismissed the entire cabinet. They had shown him no respect anywhere while he was vice president. So he appointed Daniel Webster as Secretary of State, and this signalled his support for the compromise package put together by Clay and Douglas. Douglas actually went on to become a central figure in American politics over the next 10 years, eventually taking on Abraham Lincoln for the presidency 10 years later. However, the immediate issue involved here in 1850 was what was facing the Fillmore administration was how to handle the huge additional lands, these huge territories won from Mexico in the war in 47 and 48. Zachary Taylor, the previous president, had been largely opposed to Clay's measures, but following his death, the new president and Stephen Douglas combined their efforts to promote the legislative program through Congress. Douglas proposed simplifying the whole approach by breaking it into 5 separate bills and thereby passing them separately through Congress. This idea was supported by the new president. Here we take a brief look at the 5 bills, what was involved in them, in what was known as the Compromise of 1850. First of all, California was to be allowed into the Union as a total free state, both north and south. Second thing was that the slave trade in Washington, D.C. would be banned, it would be made illegal. So that was, those 2 measures in itself were basically very much in favour of the northern approach that banned slavery, etc. The third thing in the actual bill was to counteract those 2 measures, which was the Fugitive Slave Act was to be strengthened. And there was also 2 other ideas in it, which was that the Utah and New Mexico territories would be decided whether to be slave or free later. And also the boundary between Texas, which had been a heated debate as well, the boundary between Texas and New Mexico was also decided. So overall in this compromise there was a bit for the north and something for the south as well. Basically Texas was reduced in size, the boundary between the state of Texas and New Mexico territory was set, and the federal government agreed to pay Texas a sum of $15 million for its New Mexico territory. Texas basically ceded over 500,000 square miles of territory in total to the federal government. Over the next few years, the practical implementation of the Fugitive Slave Act became a source of intense anger as anti-slavery groups in the North especially tried to frustrate the new law and break it up in street riots and that type of thing. Eventually, the Compromise of 1850 basically was seen as a failure because of the immense tensions between North and South. The Compromise came to be seen as a postponement of problems rather than a solution to problems. In relation to foreign affairs, the President selected his long-term friend Daniel Webster to be the Secretary of State. Webster was actually basically a moderate, and his selection signalled the President's support for the Compromise, but also Webster had a unique, outstanding expertise in relation to foreign policy and international trade generally. At this time, the United States felt that they needed to match European powers, especially powers like Britain, in relation to international trade. The President and Secretary of State sent Matthew Perry on an Asian exhibition. After they left office in March 1953, 3 months later, Perry arrived in Japan and he demanded access to Japanese ports for US merchant ships. In February 1854, Perry returned and signed the Kanagawa Treaty, making 2 Japanese ports available to US shipping. This is important to America in terms of trade with China and the rest of the world in that particular part of the world. In relation to Hawaii, the French Emperor Napoleon III had intended to annex Hawaii. However, President Fillmore made it known that America would not tolerate such a move. The French had no option in this regard but to back down. Closer to home then, actually, American relations with Cuba were also a concern to the Fillmore administration. Cuba was sort of very much a Spanish slave colony. Narciso Lopez led a number of exhibitions, Americans hoping to overthrow the Spanish rule. However, both Lopez and several other prominent Americans were caught and executed by the Spanish authorities. This created huge tension between the United States and Cuba, and indeed Spain as well. Many southern states wanted the president to pursue a more aggressive policy towards Cuba, take it over completely. However, northern section of the Whig Party were totally opposed to this idea, as they feared that the annexation of Cuba would also lead to further expansion of slavery. By 1852, the Whig Party were deeply divided between North and South over the issue of slavery. Many Northerners were outraged with the president for signing the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, given its obvious injustices. People from the South, on the other hand, felt deeply distrustful of the president as well in relation to slavery because of the actual measures in the Compromise of 1850. Therefore, in the Whig Party Convention of 1852, both Fillmore and the Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, both went forward. Fillmore would have been happy to see Webster get through the convention, but in the chaos of the convention, General Winfield Scott, famous for his victories in the war with Mexico, he won the nomination. The Whig Party were so divided, however, that Scott was easily beaten by Franklin Pierce in the November election. By 1852, there were 31 states in the Union. Iowa joined in 1846 and Wisconsin in May 1948. California, as we talked about earlier, joined in September 1850, just 2 months after Millard Fillmore became president. The population of the United States had grown to 25 million and was now on a par with some of the strongest powers in Europe. That's why France basically had to back down in relation to the confrontation over Hawaii. The issue of slavery tore the Whig Party apart in the following years. Fillmore was the last president representing the Whig Party. He was nominated by the Know Nothing Party in 1856, but was defeated by James Buchanan. He died in Buffalo in 1874.